Welcome to the Solo Female Travelers podcast. Here, we go beyond destinations and talk about the parts of travel you don't always hear about. We share tips you haven't heard before, real experiences from the road, and the embarrassing moments that make travel unforgettable. We ask the difficult questions and bring you unfiltered stories from bold, curious, and unconventional women.
Hello and welcome to the Solo Female Travelers podcast. My name is Mar Pages, and today I am excited to be joined by Dr. Vincie Ho, who, among many roles, and she has many, is the founder and executive director of Rise Travel Institute, a nonprofit working to create a more just and equitable world through travel education. And today we're going to talk a lot about this. Vincie is a mission-driven educator and social change leader whose work brings together sustainability, systems thinking, intercultural studies, decolonial theories, diversity, equity, inclusion and justice, human rights, and nonprofit leadership. She's a faculty at Antioch University in New England, where she teaches human rights in graduate education programs. And as most of you listening to our podcast know, Solo Female Travelers was created with a social impact mission in mind. And a huge part of everything that we do is supporting local female-owned and female-led businesses around the world. We also do our very best to be sustainable, ethical, and thoughtful as a travel company, and are constantly challenging the way we do things, the way we behave, the way we interact with places, the partners that we connect with, the way we describe our trips, even the way we speak in person and online about our trips and our work. And in one of my very recent newsletters, I decided to talk about the topic of decolonizing travel. And this is how I came across Vincie's work. She and her team at the Rise Travel Institute have put together one of the most thought-provoking documents on neocolonialism and the impact that this ever-present mentality has on the global South. And we will link to this in the episode notes. And today she will also tell us about a new course that they have just launched that is precisely addressing this and helping travelers be more thoughtful, more mindful. I haven't done the course yet, but when I was reading the manual, I realized how much of this mentality still lives and thrives today in the words that we use, and especially also the way we travel and interact with the world and even the way we describe it. And I see it in the group every single week in all the conversations that are being had. Then after reading the manual, I find myself seeing examples everywhere, and suddenly everything made sense. And I see it in social media, I see it in the communication from travel companies, in the brochures. And it's so ingrained in the way we think about the world that it's almost impossible to challenge it. Even myself, trying to make an effort every single day, I make so many mistakes. I say things that I shouldn't, and then I realize and I regret. So today, with Vincie's insights and expertise, we will be talking precisely about all of this, how to decolonize travel in our minds. And we will start by understanding what it actually means, because this is a word that's sometimes not clear and not everybody may see it the same way. We will talk about why it matters and how everyday travelers can make more thoughtful choices without feeling like they have to be perfect, because this is also very important. Every little helps. Even if you just think about it a little bit and you try to make an effort every time, that's, I think, enough. So we will discuss real examples from travel situations that I'm sure you have found yourself in, and I have found myself in these situations. They will show you how ingrained this colonial mentality is and how it has been so socialized in the way that we were brought up that we don't even think about it. So hi, Vincie, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much, Mar, for having me. I'm so excited about today's conversation. We got so much to cover.
We have a lot to talk about. I know that this is already our second attempt at recording, and we've already talked so much behind the scenes that I feel like, let's get into it. But before we get into the more deeper questions, I would love to start with your origin story so that people understand a little bit more your background and how your work eventually led you to education, human rights, and also to the foundation of the Rise Travel Institute.
Sure. Where should I begin? So yeah, every time someone asks me this question, okay, so let's say my previous career, my previous life was in Hong Kong, where I worked as a full-time French lecturer at a university. Obviously, like that path led to from a study abroad experience that I had like before then that I had in France and just got me into this interest into like teaching French as a foreign language. And so fast forward to like 10 years or 12 years into that career, I started to ask myself, like, how can I really put my expertise into better use where I can actually help uplift like communities, and instead of just like talking about wine and cheese, with my students who are gonna like work in the luxurious like haute couture of industry. I just really wanted to get into the humanitarian side of things and wanted to contribute in a more humane way, let's say. So I started to explore like what I could do outside of like teaching the language. And back in 2010, I quit my job. Let's say that job was something that I could die working, like, just spend the rest of my life and having a pretty privileged life, like not having to worry anything. But I chose to quit because I just really wanted to go see the world, and I wanted to see like how I can put my French and my language that can create greater contribution to the humankind. So I found an internship opportunity in Senegal that allowed me to work with refugees and asylum seekers from East Africa. And I worked with a very small grassroots organization back then. And it just, it opened my eyes, and I was just, I just loved every bit of that experience. And then I just decided that, okay, I wanted to seek other experiences as well. So I signed up for another program in Rwanda that actually taught me all the things that we should be doing nowadays. So I think that, like, looking back retrospectively, that was a great experience because it really, started to, it really made me start to think more deeply about, when we think that we're contributing to the world, like, by participating in volunteering experiences, you may think that you're helping, but even with the best of intentions, you can still cause harm to society that you
Right.
are hoping to help, right? And so we can leave the topic to like later of this conversation. But what I realized is that despite my best of intentions, I wasn't actually helping the children that I was supposed to help, and I was actually causing more harm. My presence was creating more harm than good for the community that I was supposed to serve. So I came home and started to think a lot more deeply about, like, what is this all about? Like traveling far away to do something that you thought was positive. And so just like really revisit like all of my intentions and also like the way I did things. And I just really thought that I was being helpful. And so like with all the learnings, I thought that I would put together a curriculum so that I can share my, my learnings and what I had learned as well, like throughout the process of traveling around the world. And what are things like you said, we all make mistakes. And I certainly made a lot of mistakes in the past. When I traveled, I rode an elephant and watched dolphin performances in an aquarium. I took children's pictures and posted on social media. And I did all of those things. Like now when I look back, I cringe, at all the terrible mistakes that I made. But then I just wanted to turn that into something positive, being able to reflect upon all those mistakes and think about like how we can travel more thoughtfully and more respectfully and more impactfully, when we travel in the future. So came up with this idea of like building a curriculum. Since I quit my last job, I went to the United Nations University, took like some courses on international peace and human rights. And then I was with the Institute of Humane Education. That actually, the course or the graduate program at Institute for Humane Education was really pivotal in the founding of Rise Travel Institute, because the concept of Rise Travel Institute as a nonprofit, like offering travel education, was my capstone project for graduation.
Right.
Yeah. And so, yeah, just like putting together like decolonial thinking, systems thinking, regenerative thinking into like, a curriculum for travelers and also for tourism professionals so that we can think more critically about our impacts on the places we visit, and not just the places we visit, but at the macro level, the planet as well. Like every time we hop on a plane, if you take a long haul flight, the carbon emission of that one-way trip can be the total amount of carbon emissions of a family in a country in the global south, right? Just like really put that into perspective. And so what we're doing at Rise right now is that we want to help people understand more their relationship to travel, how they understand travel and their place, their role in tourism. And when they go to someone else's homes, like what kind of mindset are we bringing with us? How can we behave and make travel choices in ways that actually benefits the communities, and also actions and behaviors that are reciprocal, not just extractive? Because oftentimes when we think about where to go and, what to do and where to travel to, we think about what's in it for ourselves, right? As the traveler, like,
Yeah,
we
it's a
got
one-way conversation.
want to go to Spain because I want to spend my holiday there because XYZ, like what I can get from the experience. We don't think about what is our impact on the local communities and what we can do to kind of minimize the harmful impact and maximize the benefits that we bring into the places that host us. So these are all the conversations that we want to support travelers think more about. And that's what we do at Rise Travel Institute.
Yes. And today you've mentioned quite a few of the topics that we're going to try to make them a bit more tangible for people. And, the idea of today's conversation is not to tell people what to do. It's more to provide food for thought, if you want, like to make people realize that, this that you have been doing for so long, that's so ingrained, so institutionalized, because the travel companies and the destinations will tell you to do that, will promote certain things that are just not great. Thoughtful, mindful, ethical, responsible point of view. So it's just about bringing a little bit of awareness to that so that we don't do them, or we do them in a different way. I think that as you were talking, I was thinking of a very simple analogy. It's like when you go to your friend's house, right? When you go to your friend's house, you treat their home with respect. You are mindful, you're respectful, you don't litter, you don't go around taking things, you don't go around taking photos and posting them online. It's a little bit the same when you visit another country, right? It's like you're going to your friend's house.
Yeah, we actually do have that analogy in our new program.
There you go. Great minds think alike.
Exactly.
So let's start with talking about the topic itself. Like, can you please, for people to understand better, can you define the concept of decolonizing travel, and what does this very academic, intimidating, and sometimes like big word means in very plain layman terms for people to understand?
100%. So I think decolonizing travel is really about recognizing something that most of us don't think about when we're booking flights or when we are planning a trip, that the world that we live in or travel around in today was fundamentally shaped by colonialism. So like the political structures, the economic systems, the social hierarchies, and like the very fact that things are expensive here in this country and like less expensive in another country, all of it. The fact that some of us like can move around the world freely, whereas others can't. There are passports that are really powerful. Like you don't need, you can travel with those passports like everywhere visa free. Whereas like for someone like with a weaker passport, then they may need to apply for a visa. Almost everywhere they go, applying for a visa doesn't guarantee you getting the visa. Sometimes your application may be denied even after spending a lot of money, and like all of your plans will be kind of like disrupted just because like there are these things that are completely out of control, right? And so the fact that some of us can move around the world freely and others cannot, this is not an accident, right? It is directly tied to the history of colonial power. And colonialism doesn't just end in the 20th century when the majority of colonized territories gain independence, because its legacy is still pretty much alive, right? There are still questions of land sovereignty for indigenous peoples, and in criminal justice systems that disproportionately target racialized communities. And there are structural inequalities that exist in our own societies and also in every places we travel to. And those are pretty much shaped by colonialism. And another thing is that we need to understand is that colonialism is extractive by design. You go somewhere, you conquer that place, you oppress the local people, you take their resources. And now when you honestly look at how modern tourism operates, who holds power, who profits, who get this place, and you start to see some very like deeply uncomfortable similarities or parallels between colonialism, like the historical settler colonialism, and the neo-colonialism, which is this new form of like extractive practice that we're mimicking everywhere we go to. So to decolonize our travels is really just to become critically aware of how we participate in that global tourism system. And in other words, it means to ask who actually benefits from tourism. Is it just the travelers? Is it the travel companies? Is it the local communities? Who is harmed by it, right? And who benefits from my trip beyond just me? And who might be exploited or oppressed because of my desire to travel, even though you may not want to hurt anyone in the first place, right? And so our mentalities, our behaviors, our choices, they all have a real impact on people, animals, and ecosystems, right? So decolonizing travel is really just about decentering ourselves. That when we think about travel, it's always like me.
Yeah, the traveler is at the center. It's not the destination. It's not the community.
Exactly. The traveler is at the center. I'm not saying that naturally we would be thinking about what I want to get from my travel experience. That's all very natural, but decolonizing travel is like trying to decenter ourselves a little bit and start asking how my presence is going to affect the local communities and the place I visit, and just really consider also the well-being of the locals. So we're not reproducing the very dynamic colonizers used to create, arriving somewhere, taking over. Like, imagine all these places hit by over tourism nowadays. In Barcelona, in Paris, in Bali, all of these places, tourists come, take what they need to take, consume their culture, and leave like after 2 days and have nothing to do with that. And then the residents will have to really endure the impact of this, the influx of tourists. So our role as mindful or like thoughtful travelers is really just to think beyond traveling for our own pleasure. How can we do it in such a way that is more thoughtful, respectful of the local communities and the resource system that the places we visit is providing us? Because like, imagine going to a place where there's already drought happening, and then we're staying in a luxury resort with 4 pools, that they need to fill.
Yeah, and a bathtub that you fill every day.
That bathtub that you fill every day too, right? Just really putting things into perspective would help us be more mindful and thoughtful and conscious.
Correct. I mean, people think about this is just a holiday, right? So they don't realize that holiday, that is just a holiday, that it's hard earned for a lot of people. It's hard earned. Maybe you're saving all year to take that vacation. And then for a lot of us, you just don't want to think about the implications or the negative consequences of what you're doing. That for you is a joyful, rewarding moment, but it also has consequences for the people that you're visiting.
I think, you're absolutely right. And I think that, we're not shaming anyone who wants to just enjoy their vacation. It's important to know that it is okay to want to enjoy your holiday, your vacation that is hard earned. And it's also important to think about how you can do it in such a way that is thoughtful for the local communities.
Yeah, it's not exclusive. It's not like you need to have a bad time for it to be like a respectful and ethical vacation. Like, it's not like, I need to go and suffer now on my vacation. I don't want to do that. Absolutely not, right? You can have, I would argue that it can be better, that it will be better if you are more mindful and you take care more of people, because then it's a two-way conversation. It's not extractive. It's not one way. It's not just all about you. You make it also about the other person. And, there's so much research on the topic of happiness and how much more happier we are when we give rather than when we receive. So I will argue that it is probably going to be a better vacation if it's not colonial in nature.
That is 100% true. And we're going to talk, if we have time, we can talk a little bit about how you can do that. There is this trend of community tourism rising. And I think it's important to know what exactly it is about and how can we do it so that like the exchange is reciprocal and so that the experience is meaningful for both the visitors and the communities that host us. So,
absolutely.
And other thing that I wanted to flag, that is, you talked about that earlier too, that is the colonial travel is not about guilt. It's a learning process. We all make mistakes, right? And we still continue to make mistakes. That there's one word that I regret using. I mean, we do that all the
every
time
day.
too.
Every day I'm like, dang, I catch myself doing or thinking or saying something that I shouldn't. It is a constant effort because, of course, like I come from the largest empire of all times. We were the biggest colonizers of all time, right? Like, I mean, who else was more colonizing than Spain? Maybe the British were like worse than us. But like we were terrible, right? Of course, this is 500 years ago, but the last colony that Spain had were Cuba and the Philippines until 1898. It's not so long ago. Today, there are so many colonies, right? I'm about to go on a trip to French Polynesia, New Caledonia. These are French territories in the South Pacific. Like they are on a different day than France, right? I mean, these are colonies in the modern day colonies. And, some of them have referendums for independence. Some want to leave, some don't want to leave. So many countries still have colonies today, right? So it's not like the colonialism ended, right? Even without talking about neocolonialism and capitalism and financial colonialism, still like the old colonialism still exists. There are so many colonies still existing. So it's not over. It's not about shaming. It's very hard to go against everything you've been learned and taught for 45 years, right? So it's like a process. It's like, even if we manage to make people think 2 or 3 things that they didn't think about before, I will be very happy with today's conversation.
100%. Yes, it is a long process of unlearning because we all got socialized into this world with a lot of things that we've already internalized, right? And so it is going to be a process, but it will benefit even if you just start thinking about it, right? Like, so shifting from an extractive relationship with places and people to one with reciprocity and accountability and just like genuine curiosity to connect. That is the beginning of decolonial travel, I would say. So it's a learning process. We are still making mistakes. There are terms that we use as an organization at Rise that we no longer use, that we are moving away from, that we're retiring. And it's fine. You can admit a mistake. We are going to continue to evolve. There are things that is considered acceptable today may not be the case in 5 years down the road, right? And so we just need to have this open-mindedness to continue on this journey of learning and unlearning. So
yes. Absolutely. So I wanted today's conversation to be very practical, right? Just to raise awareness and like perhaps to challenge or to talk about or to discuss situations that I see in the group every day, that I find myself in, that I observe everywhere, right? So I'd like us to be very practical and very focused on several real life situations. And so you have a very fantastic resource, you as the Rise Travel Institute, on this that has real life examples. And this is like the Pathways to Equity, Rise Travel Institute's Decolonial Guide to Travel for the Conscious Traveler, which we will link to in the notes. And then you will also tell me later on about the new course that you're launching, which has the same objective. And some of these situations, I see them in the group and they are also in the manual. So this is all based also on my personal experience. I was telling you before we started today's recording that even in the last 48 hours, there have been 2 conversations in the group that were so timely for today's conversation. One was a post from a member from the Caribbean who tried to raise awareness to the fact that she can no longer live in her country because she has been completely priced out by tourism, by resorts, by international chains, by expats, and she can no longer live in her country. And the other one was a post about traveling to Naples, which is a forever polarizing destination for many people. And there were more than one comment of people literally saying things like Naples is a rubbish pit. And so this kind of vocabulary, this kind of situation, the awareness raised around, not being able to live in your own city, even your own country because of tourism, are some of the things that today we'll talk about. So we already made the point that this is not to shame anybody, right? We are all here to learn, myself included, right? So I would like to start with maps. You raised the point of passports. This is, the Henley Institute has just released their, I think, twice annual update on their passport rankings, right? And the major passport that gained rankings this time was the UAE, right? They've added, in the last few years, they've added like 50 new visa-free countries. In the top places, there's always European countries and there's always Singapore and Japan. Singapore, I guess, does a very good job at managing, diplomatic relations, and they are a very well-known, it's like the Switzerland of Asia, right? They're very well-known for being neutral. Japan, big colonizing nature, and then you have nation, and then you have, Spain is always in the top ones, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, France, Belgium, like big colonizing nations still keep that ranking, still keep that visa-free access to the majority of countries on Earth. I believe at this point, I only need visas to like 6 or 7 countries. So that's like something out of the 190 something, however you want to describe it, right? So the passport is one measure of it, but then there's also maps. Like the maps don't show the real size of countries at all, right? So can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Sure. So the maps, the world atlas that we know, that we see everywhere, is actually not neutral.
Not at all.
Not at all. They're political documents, but most people don't think about it, right? Like the map that we're most familiar with is the Mercator projection, which is still used as the default in most apps and classrooms.
Yeah, it's the emoji. The emoji of a map is that map.
The emoji as well, right? So what it is about is that it dramatically inflates the size of Europe and North America while shrinking Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia into like smaller representations, right? And so if you dig deeper, like Africa is actually larger than the US, China, and Europe combined. But you would never know that from a standard map that we are so familiar with, right? Because we will always see like the North America being like super big. So the Mercator projection is a 16th century Flemish geographer's work that was presented first in 1569. And who gets to be at the center is really a political choice back then, right? And so for centuries, you just talked about how much like Europe sat at the top and center, like, being the colonizers. And so this is basically a visual hierarchy that implied cultural and civilizational hierarchy. And so like the current world atlas that we're familiar with today is really, colonial cartography that erased existing indigenous place names and geographies and shrinking places in the global south because of less importance, like back in the colonial era. And names are being replaced that reflect more ownership than belonging, right? And you can still see even today, there are some past colonized territories that are still called the names they used to be called, like under the colonial era, instead of how the people actually call them. So only until like recent years that like Turkey was changed back to Turkey, and people are still calling Myanmar Burma.
And so many cities in India have just been renamed back, right?
That's
because
right.
they were called the British name.
Exactly. So you see like there's a movement of like getting cities or country names renamed just recently, but that's just a very recent effort. So like how we get to know the world growing up is like really deeply ingrained in colonialism that shaped how we think and how we perceive the world. And as we talked about the World Atlas, like the way how a lot of Americans perceive Africa, they think Africa is a country, whereas it's a ginormous continent, and probably the lack of knowledge about the geography there. And also because of the influence of this representation, because how things along the equator just got shrunk, like disproportionately.
If you fly, you can see this very clearly, right? Because when you're flying, it's like, how can it be that I can cross the entire Europe in 4.5 hours? Like I can basically get to Moscow in 4.5 hours, but I need 9 hours to go from Dubai to Nigeria, or 9 hours to go from Cairo to Casablanca. Like,
then
how can it be that if I go to Europe, it's only 4 hours, but then in Africa, it's 9?
Yeah.
For the same distance on a map.
How could that be? And so like one thing that I'd like to share, since we're talking about this, if you want to see how countries and continents sizes actually compare, you can use interactive tools like the truesize.com. It's very interesting. You can actually see, like alternative to the Mercator projection, there are actually a lot of other tools proposed, including the equal area political war map that you can also download for free. So, like, there are a ton of resources. As soon as you dig more deeply, like I went down a rabbit hole to look at
I love maps, so I can see myself going down the rabbit hole there.
Yeah, so there are actually alternatives, but again, it is a political decision not to change or like deviate from the Mercator projection.
Yeah, there's no incentive to change it, right? Because the people in power are the ones who would be on the losing end. So yeah, there's no reason to change it. But I think this is just such a clear example. This and the passport are such a clear example of how colonialism remains till today, right? But then there's also something that you and I have just discussed, which is like there's a very fine line between a meaningful connection and accidentally treating people like they're part of the experience, like they're an object. You go to somewhere, like you said, people come to Barcelona, they consume the place, they absorb it, and then they leave, right? So how do you think travelers can recognize that line, and how do we avoid commoditizing a place and then turning people into a product? Like how do we avoid all of these? And maybe perhaps within the same topic, you mentioned that you've stopped using certain words. I know you've stopped using the word destination. So what do you use instead, and why do you stop using it? I still use it. Sometimes I replace the word, but I make a conscious decision every time I use the word destination to use it instead of country or place or community or city or whatever. I try to make a conscious decision of why I'm using it and why not. So tell me a bit about those. How not to use people as like a product, and how to not to consume them and commoditize them, and why is that linked to the word destination?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, the very reason why we as an organization has moved away from using the word destination, we still, like I would say 10% of the time we're still using the word because we are in the tourism industry, and it's impossible not to use it when you talk to certain people. For example, like destination marketing or destination stewardship organizations.
Yeah, just the name of the organization in charge of promoting a place. It's called Destination Management Company. So, I mean,
yeah. And also, I think, like, as you said, we're making an intentional, a deliberate decision to refrain from using it. Once again, like, we don't demonize people who do still use it. I mean, the word is so socialized into our lives everywhere in the world, not just like in the Western world, like, not just in the global South, but like it's just become such a neutral term, right? That people just use it without thinking about it. But for us, the word destination is almost like you're objectifying a place for a tourist consumption. Like you go to a destination, but hey, that destination is not a destination for people who live there. That's a place that people who live there call home. So we just prefer to use the word place, as the most neutral term. Sometimes there are like other alternatives, but we try to like avoid using it. And back to your question about like how not to commodify cultures. Again, back to what you were saying earlier, no one wants to deliberately cause harm, right? Tourists don't mean to do harm. We just do things because we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, we do it with the best intentions, we just don't know the consequences.
And so I think the first step is really to do more research, to do better research, to understand like, okay, if you are going to sign up for a community tourism experience, yes, you will have the chance to interact with the community, but what exactly are you going to do, right? Like, what exactly are you going to gain? And is this an activity that is led by the community itself? How is the fee going to be used? Like, is it going to circulate back into the local community? Is it run by foreign-owned tourism company that is taking masters to these projects? I think you may not know the transparency in terms of like how much they're paid for certain things, but you would know in terms of interaction. Are they just like performing for you? Is there a genuine interaction? Do the hosts look happy when you're there? Like, do they genuinely want you to be there and they welcome you into the community? And that tells you a lot about the power dynamics, right? Like, between them and like whoever that's the middleman. Do more research. Again, like community tourism is trending. So there's a lot of community washing out there as well.
Yeah, whenever there's financial and economic opportunity, somebody will capture the opportunity beyond the reasoning or the objective or the positive impact, right? They're doing it for the money, not because they are trying to make a difference.
Exactly. So there's there's a growing trend of community tourism and therefore community washing as well. That is like more and more rampant. And so we need to really do research. If you're going to sign up for a community activity or project, look at whether the project is led by the local community themselves. And that is a very good indicator, because like if it is led by the local community, they're going to do everything they want to, use the project as a vehicle to empower their people, to kind of uplift their own community, to like generate income for their own people, right? So like community-led tourism is the best. And also in terms of accommodation, hospitality, in terms of where you stay, like look for locally owned and independent owned accommodation options that would be best. Sometimes it's hard to get away from, like, if you go to a city which is already dominated by like the hotel chains, it's more convenient to just like book a Hilton or a Hyatt or like a Marriott. But if there are choices, that requires you to dig a little deeper. There may be a B&B somewhere. There may be like an independent owned family run boutique hotel somewhere, which may require you to go a little bit farther away from like the places that you want to go to. But if that is what it takes to support the local community so that the destination thrives, so that it's a good place to visit, then, that's an easy compromise to make. So yeah, back to your question, I would say that cultural appropriation is actually very easy to identify. If you're commodifying like an activity, like, okay, you just pay to get to wear the costume, to take photos, like, industries, that is pretty much like objectifying culture for me. I would avoid doing that. If you really want to try on costume because that is meaningful, that is only meaningful when you are invited to do that, by the host community who want to share the culture with you. And Correct. Then in addition to like trying on the traditional clothing and take beautiful pictures, what you gain is so much more than that. You gain knowledge about how the garment is made and why is it important, why certain motifs,
and the history of who wore it and why and when and how.
Exactly. And all of those things. And then you have this personal connection with a host that is sharing this tradition with you too. So I see a lot of cultural appropriation and commodification of culture happening everywhere in the world. Like, in Asia, you can just rent a costume and just pose in front of a historic monument. And it has become very trendy, all driven by social media, TikTok and all those things. People see those images and videos and they imagine themselves doing that too. And so they want to do that when they go to these places without really thinking more deeply what cultural tradition actually really means and what those traditional garment actually embodies in terms of cultural tradition. So yeah, like that's a lot that is driven, empowered by social media and by
Well, it's a simplification of something that's just like
very
very
much
visual. Oh, I
so.
want to take this. I want to put on a kimono in Japan, and I want to go and wear it in
Mhm.
this temple, and that's it, right? But like you say, it's never black and white, right? It's never like, oh, you should never do that.
There's
It
so much,
depends,
yeah.
right? You can
Yeah.
be invited by an insider into that tradition and learn about it in a way that you wouldn't if you obviously just rent it, put it on, and go and take 2 photos, right? But if you're wearing it for a couple of hours and somebody shows you, like, to me, putting on a kimono was quite insightful. Because the first time that I did it with a man who makes the wigs for the geishas. So,
Yeah.
these wigs take an insane amount of effort to make. And this was a 4-hour photo shoot. 4 hour. 2 hours of which was just putting the makeup on my face. It was a geisha photo shoot, right? And me and my friend was dressed as a samurai. So we did the photo shoot together. But the photo shoot part was like half an hour. The majority of the event was basically putting all the makeup and getting yourself ready to look like a geisha. So the understanding of what it takes to look like a geisha, I would have never gotten it by just seeing a geisha, right? Because you don't understand the hours, right? I ended up with a massive migraine because of all the pulling of my skin from the tape that went under the wig. And then this person makes the wigs, right? So he started offering this service so that people would understand the craft of making these wigs and what goes behind becoming a geisha, the traditional of this. But this was a 4-hour thing. This wasn't a 5-minute, I put on a dress, I go take pictures in a beautiful temple that I know nothing about, right? So it's like there's always so many nuances. There's always so many perspective, right? It's never so black and white of like, oh, never wear a kimono, never wear a dress, never. It's like, it depends. Who is inviting you? What are you trying to get out of it? Are you just taking a photo for Instagram? Or are you trying to learn a tradition by immersing yourself into the tradition yourself by somebody who is sharing it with you, not just by you going and buying it and just appropriating it and consuming it, but
Yeah.
by being invited into a tradition, or like wearing a sari, right? My
Yeah.
ex-partner is Indian, and his mother-in-law helped me buy saris for an Indian wedding, right? Like, I was wearing a sari. I was the only foreigner in the wedding. It was my partner's sister getting married. So, everybody was wearing a sari. Saris are beautiful. I would have never bought a sari myself. I wouldn't have known what to wear. I wouldn't have known how to put it on. So,
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
course, this was part of the whole family tradition, right? So it's not the same as me just deciding to buy a sari and going somewhere to take pictures with it. I don't know. I find that these things are never black and white. That's why the most
100.
important thing is just to at least think about it, right? You can still choose to consume a culture, but at least you thought about it, right? Hopefully, by thinking about it, you don't no longer do the harmful thing because you now understand what it means and the implications that it has. Like, these things are never nuanced. You also talked about the guides and, like, not the guides, but the person hosting an activity or an experience. Is the community involved? Are they the ones having the voice? Are they the ones telling you the
Exactly.
experience? Or is like some foreign person coming to tell you what they should be talking about? Like, who's talking? Who's doing the talking? And are
Who's
they
doing
repeating a
exactly.
script that has been told, or are they explaining their culture to you in their own words? And to me, something that I always found quite interesting, and one of our first episodes from the podcast was talking with our host in Oaxaca, and she very much started this community tourism in a very, like, truly a very unique and meaningful way, and like very, very, like, really about this, right? So she takes people to community projects, and it's the community who talks, right? She doesn't tell
Yeah.
them what to say ever. She just
Exactly.
translates because they don't speak English. And so whatever it is they say, that's great. But she raised something that I also never thought about, which is that when we ask for feedback, we only ever ask for feedback from the travelers. We never ask the community how they think about this activity. Like, who asked the community, is this good for you? What do you think? Do you like that? Do you not like it? How would you do it differently? She asked them, what would you do differently? And then, she helps them, like, do the thing differently however they want, right? And trying to find an in-between between what the traveler wants and what the community wants, right? So we never actually ask the community. That's why I was saying, I think it's better when you think about it, because it's a much more meaningful interaction than you just going there and observing something. You can be a part of it. You can understand what the other person is thinking, and hopefully you go home with a much better picture of a place.
100%. I think what you just pointed out is reciprocity, right?
Correct. It
Reciprocity.
needs to be two-way.
Yeah, it needs to be two-way. And when Rise Travel Institute ran our experiential journey to Guatemala, we visited 12 indigenous-led communities, 12 indigenous-led community projects. And one of the things that we'd always do with them is exactly what you were talking about. We would always ask them, like, each of these communities, what they thought about travelers, like entering this spaces, like entering the communities. How would they want travelers to behave? How would they want the interactions with tourists be like? because ultimately it's their home. They have the agency to decide like what they want for the communities and their spaces, right? I certainly wouldn't want like where I live right now to be invaded by, flocks and flocks of tourists and doing things like the way they want, and having our economy and everything completely changed to cater the needs of tourists, right? We
Correct.
have our own needs too. So like when we talk about reciprocity, that is also to think about what the community needs, right? And whether the presence of tourism is changing that landscape. And it is important for us. And which is why community-led tourism is so important and so powerful. That is the communities, because they have agency to decide how they want tourism to be in their homes. We are going to practice tourism, or tourism is going to operate in ways that is in compliance with the real needs of the communities, right? Instead of doing it in the old extractive colonial way, that is foreign-led expeditions going into a place and then just like tell the local communities to show what they want or show their traditions, like, cultural traditions
they just perform for the traveler.
Perform for the traveler.
Whatever the traveler wants to see, that's what you give them.
Exactly. And there's one thing, like oftentimes I hear from travelers, they would be like, oh, I travel to the places to bring our tourism dollars into the places, so they should be thankful. Hey, but like, really think about that, right? Like pause and think about that for a moment. A lot of communities, especially in the global south, like they may not have the bargaining power because of poverty. They're coerced into performing, because tourism is an economic opportunity for them, but that doesn't mean that they're not exploited, that in that transaction because of the power dynamics, right? So we need to really be careful about that when we think about, empowering a place economically just by introducing tourism, or just by us traveling to those places and spending money in those places. That's not true, because there's also this thing about tourism leakage that we briefly talked about like last time. Oftentimes 50, 60, 70% of the amount that we spend in a place actually don't stay there, because a lot of money got leaked out of the country that hosts us into foreign-owned companies and so on.
Yeah, that person that I mentioned earlier, the person in the group saying like, I had to leave my Caribbean island because I can no longer afford living here. I guarantee you this is because all the hotels and resorts there are owned by international chains. So the money does not stay in the community, because otherwise she wouldn't have had to leave. Because, if you have so much tourism and there's so much investment and so much money flowing into the country, why do locals have to leave? Because the money does not stay in the country. The money gets repatriated to whichever shareholders in whichever country in the world, mostly, Western Europe, North America, wealthier nations in the global north, right? This is definitely not benefiting the locals. And some countries have really put a stake on the ground and said like, enough is enough, and I don't want more people to come. And, like if I think of Japan has very clear rules with like how foreigners should behave, right? And they have restrictions and limitations, and they have laws put in place for people to behave in a certain way. And they would rather you not come if you don't do that, right? Why? Because they have the power to do that. They have the power to say, they have the bargaining power countries in the global south do not have. The same for Hawaii, right? Hawaii has also been very vocal on, we don't want you to come if you don't respect certain rules. Bhutan has a very high daily rate if you want to visit the country, right? So these are countries that have the bargaining power to do so. Some other ones don't have it, and they need the money at any cost. And at any cost ends up being colonial mentality. I have money and I should be given whatever I want, whenever I want. And then I hear these things of like, oh, I went to this country whose language is not English and nobody spoke English. Or, how dare they like have power cuts? Or how come I couldn't run my bathfield every day? Like so many of these things that you just don't realize. You're in a country that doesn't have the same privileges as you. What you're taking as a tourist is not going to the local people.
Yeah, you're right. Like you just touched on like, the traveler entitlement and traveler privilege. Now, we oftentimes don't see having a privilege means you're in a dominant group and that everything is designed in this world that appears normal to you. You would only notice that the system is not working for you when you actually don't have privilege, right? And so that is another big topic that we can get into, that we actually talk a lot about in our new program. But back to what you were talking about, a post that your member shared, that she had to leave the Caribbean because like, the cost of living is too high. That is also driven by the demand of tourism. People want to go. So a lot of like residential establishments, they got turned into short-term rentals, and then like the rent is that jacked up
And
the
it's owned
price.
by foreigners, it's not owned by the locals who are renting out their homes. It's bought by a foreigner.
And real estate companies as well, right? Like if you go on Airbnb, you would see
Exactly.
that a lot of properties are actually owned by the same property or real estate company. And you see that, and they just have like a management company
Yes.
that manages all those properties for them, right? And so this is so very common, and it is really driving people, like residents, out of like a lot of these cities or places that are plagued by overtourism nowadays, right? Like people really struggle. And because of the demand of tourism, in addition to short-term rentals, there are also other things, right? Like the demand for certain type of shops, right? Like
Yeah.
you go to a Greek island and you start to see like all the traditional shops that were there for the residents, they're gone. And now they're being replaced by like what the tourist needs. I went to Lake Atitlan in Guatemala a few years ago, and we went to one of the yoga destinations called Lake San Marcos. What we saw was shocking to us, right? Like, it's a place where indigenous communities still live, and you see children going to school while foreigners are walking barefoot. These yoga retreat goers who are walking barefoot in the village, wearing close to nothing. Western women just wearing a bra top and walking bare feet and so on. It's shocking to see that a lot of shops were transformed into like shops that sell, healthy whole foods, things like that, to cater to this particular audience.
Your matcha latte, which has nothing to do with Guatemalan culture, right?
Right. And then you see that like the local economy is like catering into like the need of the tourists, of this particular segment of tourists. And so it was very sad to see the locals, they respect those who kind of bring business into their villages, but at the same time kind of, really destroying the originality of what they used to have.
Yeah, and then you don't have a space for your grocery shopping and for your things, for your day-to-day needs if you live a normal, regular life, because it's being taken, because it's far more productive and like economically viable to have a shop that sells matcha lattes than to have a supermarket that sells things for local people, right? So, sometimes
Right.
it's the government is the one that is often being blamed, right? Like somebody should put these rules in place so that these things don't happen, right? But in some of the countries in the global south, the government just doesn't have the power to do that, or there are other issues.
Yeah, some governments encourage it, and look at the digital nomad visas, right? Like
Yeah.
now governments are actually like playing an active role in letting the countries being transformed by tourism, because they're allowing like, tax-free, visa-free kind of long stay for tourists from the West who have the means and the time to do that. And so like digital nomads are also kind of changing the landscape of a lot of places that they're going to right now.
All the gentrification that comes with it, and the fact that people are then, displaced out of their homes, right? But,
Exactly.
I wanted to go back to what you were saying at the beginning when you were talking about the mistakes that you made when you were younger, and we've all made those mistakes. I have made all of the mistakes you mentioned and more. But like I wanted to touch on like when I was young and a bit less mindful of. Also, it's true that 20 years ago nobody talked about these things.
Yeah.
So it was just like you had to have some very strange awareness to question. So like there were things that to me felt bad, but I couldn't quite pinpoint why they were bad. There were things that felt bad, and I just never did them, even though nobody talked about it, because they just felt bad to me. I still couldn't like verbalize why, but I just felt like, okay, this I should not do.
Like you feel uncomfortable about like something, and then you just don't have the language to talk about it.
Yeah, you just don't know why, but you just don't feel good about it.
Exactly. And this is exactly what we do at Rise. And like our mission is almost like to help people find that language to articulate what's happening within their minds, and how to verbalize their reflections if they learn something from their own experience.
Yeah, it's like a bit like the gift of fear is like the gift of knowing that you're uncomfortable. Your gut feel is like, this is wrong. I want to get out of here. I don't know exactly why and what is it that makes me get out of here, because I feel like the situation is dangerous, or I feel like the situation is wrong and I don't know why. And I think that one of the ones that for me was always wrong for the beginning was the white savior complex, right? And you mentioned this when you worked in Rwanda and you felt like, I'm not helping anybody. I'm actually harming people. And I know that this, voluntourism is a topic that gets talked about in the group all of the time. Like, there's not a week that goes by that somebody doesn't ask about this, because people have the best intentions and they want to help. And if you're younger and you have free time in the summers or in your vacations, you want to
Yeah.
make use of that time to help others, right? You want to really help and really enrich the lives of the people that you're trying to help and have a positive impact. Nobody goes there
Yeah.
to harm, right? But a typical well-meaning post will be something like, I would like to volunteer in Africa. Again, Africa as a country, as a place, rather than 56 countries. And then the next thing will be, and I want to volunteer with children. So I want to volunteer in Africa with children. There's not a week that goes by that somebody doesn't ask this question. Anybody has suggestions about an ethical organization. So already people know that there are risks associated with this, right? So they are asking for an ethical organization because they understand that there are organizations that are not ethical and that do more harm than good, right? And then can you help me break down why that is problematic, and, like, how somebody who's very well-intentioned and well-meaning can end up causing more damage, perhaps linked even to your personal opinion or experience, if you would like?
Yes, sure. I mean, I feel like talking to my 30-year-old self. Back then, I just told you at the beginning of this interview that I quit my job to go to Africa, and it was a big deal for me back then. And so the first job was fine. Like, I really learned a lot, and it was, like, it was definitely a more ethical engagement or like ethical involvement. The second one, not so much, because I was placed in a children's program in Rwanda. And so, I was like, sure, I'd go. But looking back, there were a lot of red flags that I didn't know how to articulate at the time.
But did you feel uncomfortable? Did you have this feeling that something is wrong?
Of course, yeah. I was like, no, like, yeah, I felt super uncomfortable because I felt completely useless there. Like, so I asked myself, like, why am I even here? Like, what can I actually do to contribute? Like, what can I do that the locals can't, right? What is the value of me being there?
What makes me more competent, right, than the local person?
What makes me more competent? That was no specific skills that I brought with me to the community. The other volunteers met with a medical doctor who was there for like a few years. He was doing real work, right? Like he was doing real work in a village, but I wasn't, right? I volunteered in an orphanage, and every day I just went there to play with the children. I basically had nothing to do. There were tasks given to us, but they were not like very sustainable. It wasn't really like help develop anything over time. It was just like, going to play with the children and do a little bit of cleanup. And that was one day, one of the kids was sick. He was really sick. He was like, 5, 6 years old. I was instructed to take him to the hospital. Well, first of all, I didn't know where the hospital is. Back then, there was no Google Maps. And even if there wasn't necessarily, street address. Like, that doesn't work the same way as we do here, like numbering everything in a grid system. Nothing like that, right? And so it was a rural village, and I didn't know where the hospital was. I didn't know what was happening to the kid. I knew that he had a fever and he was vomiting. I had no idea because I didn't speak the language. Like, they speak Kinyarwanda is the local language, right? My French was not useful at all. And so I needed someone to go with me. And so why was I even, they didn't actually.
You were not adding any value on top of the value that the local person was at.
Absolutely not. I was not. Well, not just that, but I felt that I was a burden.
Because now they have to take care of you too.
They have to take care of me too, like, cause I was not used to like walking those dirt roads leading to the hospital, and I was just not catching up. And so I was like, okay, why am I here? Right. And so that was probably one of the wake up calls that I had. Because you may have the best of intentions, but like, well, first of all, you're not adding value. You're not contributing meaningfully, despite that you want to help, right? Secondly, my presence, yes, I may be like teaching the kids English a little bit every day, but then I may be taking away someone else's jobs, right? A local English teacher can do that job, but I was given the opportunity because a for-profit voluntourism organization arranged that trip, right?
I was going to ask you if you paid for it, because typically you pay for it, right? So this is Again, this is a financial exchange.
Yeah. And you pay a lot of money for that. And so now, like, voluntourism has become a multi-million-dollar industry. And oftentimes, I would say, like, most of the time, it really does more harm than good and is worth examining closely. And one of the books that I would recommend is Ours to Explore Privilege, Power, and the Paradox of Voluntourism by Pippa Biddle. She writes about the voluntourism industry and why is it wrong to let this industry continue to perpetuate like the cycle of poverty and also a lot of orphans, a lot of children in orphanages around the world, they actually have living parents.
Correct. This is a major issue in Asia, right? There are so many
That's right.
orphanage
But a
tours,
lot of
right?
people still don't know about it, even though like this is getting like more media attention and more academic or newspaper articles are writing about it. Back in the days when I was volunteering, that definitely wasn't brought to my radar. But even now, it's a fact that is being exposed, like in documentaries and so on. The majority of well-meaning travelers don't know about this and they continue to pay to join children's program like this one, right? And so I think the voluntourism industry mimics the international charity industry. I would call it an industry because it is a problematic that is perpetuating poverty and suffering because of its existence. So we need to think more about what charity actually means. And voluntourism is definitely one that is kind of similar to that concept. They take advantage of your desire to help and as a result perpetuate the poverty and suffering so that they can continue to make money and perpetuate the cycle and make sure that the cycle continues.
It's in the end, it's a product, right? They've come up with a product to sell to you so that you feel better and you feel like you're doing something and somebody's benefiting from that, but it's not the community because like you say, you're taking a job away from somebody. You're doing a job that some local person would be doing and getting a salary for. Instead, you are paying to do that job. Like now, let's just for a second think about, would you ever do that in your country? Would you go to the other city and pay to do the job?
Right?
Like nobody would ever do that, right? But this is so colonial.
No, like even if you volunteered, you would do a due diligence.
And you would never pay to volunteer in your own city, right? Because you'll be helping somebody. You would never pay to volunteer and I understand that there are costs associated with accommodation and food, and that's fine, right? I've also volunteered in an NGO. I spent an entire summer in Honduras when I was 22. We paid for our accommodation. Like we were basically sleeping on mattresses on the floor.
Yeah.
We paid for our food. We lived in one of the poorest colonias neighborhoods in Tegucigalpa. And we bought our money. We bought our own food. And we had like a volunteer house. And we all slept in bunk beds and on the floor, depending on how many people there were. So we didn't pay for accommodation. There was a house for us. We didn't take anybody's job, though. And we didn't pay anything to anybody. We paid for our flight and we paid for our food when we were there. Nobody was benefiting from anything. And the most of the people that were there were teachers who were like filling in roles of teachers in the country. And like they were basically earning the local salary. So, like they were just transferring skills and they had decided to devote their whole life to like doing this. I actually believe they were not even paid. They were doing the job for free. They didn't pay. Nobody got paid. That was a genuine NGO. The students in the higher levels were basically taking care of the project. They had to contribute by managing the project. It still exists today. It's an NGO that has been going on for more than 40 years. They have more than 10,000 students there. And what we were doing as volunteers is that the priest that started the organization, a priest from Malaga, from Spain, when the Hurricane Mitch completely destroyed 80% of the country and started this NGO to like provide all sorts of things from education to food and like to helping the really vulnerable groups. And so what we were doing as volunteers, that his thinking was, if I get people to come here and really understand what the project is like and what people who live in Honduras in the poorest part, the challenges that they have, they'll go back to their country and they'll find people who will sponsor the education of children. And it worked. It worked. Of course, you go there, you spend as long or as little as you can. You pay for your own expenses. He's only providing a room where we were all sleeping however we were fitting, right?
Yeah.
If we were 20, we were sleeping on the floor. If we were 10, we were sleeping in bunk beds. And he managed to bring back this sensitization that you don't have unless you live in a place you understand the challenges. And then on our day-to-day, we were never doing the job of teachers if you were not a teacher. You were at most helping the teacher in the class, or most of our job, because this was 25 years ago, was documenting the children that were looking for a sponsor. So basically, this was before the time of internet. So we were taking photos and creating their details. So then we would find somebody who would sponsor their education. So we were doing this like add-on type of work. Of course, a local person could have done it, but this was a way. Nobody was paying us anything. We were not paying anybody either. We were just basically covering our costs. And he thought this was a great way to sensitize people, right? So I've always thought back about that NGO because it had very little overheads, because basically the older kids in high high school were managing the project. And the ones going to university had to devote a certain amount of hours to get the education for free. So it was kind of like self-managing, right? And then there were lots of donors who were paying for salaries of things, right? Governments and then people, right? Like just individual people who got to know about the project from first hand or second hand and then contributed every year by sending money to pay for the school uniforms, for the fees, for everything for the children, right? So this is an NGO, but nowadays this is a business, right? You're paying thousands of dollars to go and work somewhere, to build a school. This is a very common, right? Building something, building a school. So instead of hiring a local builder, you as a foreigner are paying to build the house of the place or the school or whatever it is that you're building, right? And you have no experience in building. So you're not qualified to build anything,
and
right?
So all to say that it's just to satisfy your white savior complex, right? Like at the end of the
just
day,
to feel better
it's
that
really,
you're helping.
Yeah. And I love your example of volunteering when you were in your 20s in Honduras. That was a different type of program. It was led by nonprofit. You had to cover your own flight and accommodation or your own expenses because naturally, like the nonprofit, if they are raising money for their own children, they're not going to.
Correct. So we were paying for our costs, so we were not adding burden to the NGO,
to the organization. So I think that's super fair. And so this example also ties back to what we were saying earlier. That is like, things are not black and white. We're not saying that all volunteering experiences are bad, but we really need to be careful, like cautious when we're seeking out volunteering experiences abroad, because voluntourism industry is a huge money-making for-profit industry, right? And we just need to be aware that they exist and pay attention to what kind of project that we're selecting, do your due diligence and also ask yourself, like, what skills are you bringing to the table?
Correct. Yeah, because if you have very specialized skills, you are helping. If you are a doctor and you go to a rural community, like I have a friend who does this every now and then, right? She's an ophthalmologist and every few years she'll go with an NGO to a rural community and they'll spend a month there performing procedures that the community has no access to.
Yeah, no, 100%. So again, it's not saying that you should not go volunteer overseas. It's just that you have to do a little more research, a little bit more digging to find out, like, what you're going to participate in and ask yourself, like, why you want to go and what you're bringing to the table, right? And a very good friend of mine, Kara Martinez, who is the founder and executive director of Love Without Borders for refugees in Greece, they do receive university students every year, to volunteer with the refugees that their organization is supporting. And so that is super meaningful. And what we needed to make sure is that the students, they have like the training that is needed to interact thoughtfully and ethically with the people they mean to support, right? And so together we kind of collaborated on a document called A Guide to Ethical Volunteering with Asylum Seekers. It's on RISE's website. Again, it is another publication of RISE Travel Institute that I pour hours into. So like if you are interested in volunteering with vulnerable populations, asylum seekers and refugees and children, take a look at this toolkit. It's packed with, great information and also like grounded in trauma-informed care approach. So highly recommend it. Even though I'm tooting my own horn right now because I was the author, but I think I really hope that anyone who wants to volunteer or support vulnerable populations in a volunteering capacity, this is going to be a helpful resource for you.
Mm-hmm. And we've very briefly talked about the fact that you also were working with children, right? And there's like a second impact that people never consider. And to me, one of the most shocking things that I hear even guests on our tour ask us is whether they can visit a school. And then in my mind, sometimes I don't even know how to respond because to me, this is such an obvious one, right? And I cannot understand how people don't feel uncomfortable in this situation because many of our guests are parents themselves. So just for a second, imagine that somebody would come to the school of your children to visit your kids and then take photos with them that they would then post on social media. Like, first of all, it's illegal in most countries to do that. Like in most of the Western European countries, you cannot just show up in a school, bring a bunch of tourists and take photos of the children. It's against the law. So let alone posting them online. But even if it wasn't against the law, like you would, the parents would raise up in arms, right? Like they would never allow this to happen. However, when you go and do this to a poorer country, then it's okay. And to me, this is colonial mentality.
Exactly. Going back to this colonial mindset is exactly that.
It's
So
like it's an object. It's like a combination of like the children in another country in the global south is an object. The children in the global south are not the same. They don't have the same value. They don't have the same rights, apparently, than your own children or the children of your friends or the children in your own country. You would never do this in your country. Even if you didn't have children, you would never do that in Europe, right? Nobody has ever asked me, can I go and visit a school in Europe? They only ask me if they can visit a school in Tanzania, or if they can visit a school in Morocco, or if they can visit a school in, I don't know what other country in the global south, right? They don't ask me this in Europe.
So what you're talking about is the colonial mindset that we
100%
have, right? And also another level of colonialism that happens here in this example is that, yes, it is illegal to do that in the global north. But why is it not illegal to do that?
It's become a business also, right? Like some of these schools will raise money this way, right? By selling tickets or by raising donations from welcoming tourists.
And so once again, like the power dynamics is still there, right? The power dynamics is rooted in colonialism. And why is it that like some countries are so poor nowadays and they kind of depend and they have to cave into what people from the global north want?
They productize everything, including the children. And like you say, orphanages where the children are not orphans.
Most of them are not, unfortunately. Yeah. Yes. So RISE Travel Institute, one of the objectives of our work is really to invite travelers to think more deeply about, the kind of topics that we've been talking about today. There's so much more out there to be talked about. Doomsday travel, whether it's ethical to climb the Mount Everest, whether it's ethical to travel to Antarctica. There's so much that we can talk about. And again, what we want to do is not to tell you what to do or what not to do. Like, don't go here, don't go there. That's not what we do. Our work is just really to provide you with a framework, with the tools, with a lens, to think about these things more deeply. And then you're going to make decisions on your own. You're going to come up with your own ethical framework. You're going to decide what is acceptable to you and what is not. So that's our work at RISE.
Absolutely. I mean, there's just so many of these situations, right? Just before we got on this call and at the beginning of our conversation, I was telling you about this other post in the group that is a very common one where somebody criticized a destination and just said, oh, this place is a rubbish pit. This destination is so often being talked about in those terms because there are issues, political issues that end up with rubbish not being collected on time. The rubbish problem is a problem that many countries have, many places have, many cities have. I've seen it in lots of places. But when people reduce a place to nobody spoke English, the food was terrible, the traffic was horrific, it was ugly, it was dirty, you are defining someone's house. And people don't even say that. People will say food was disgusting. Everybody was so different. Nobody respected the rules in the road. Crossing the road was chaotic. This thing that whatever it is didn't make any sense. The place is so backwards, right? They're describing someone's home, right? These things Yeah.
And, I think partly that's because we're socialized into a world where tourism marketing is also responsible for how we perceive places, right? We have always been presented with the most sanitized, beautified, aestheticized version of a place. And when we go there, we have certain expectations. And when we get to see all the realities of a place, we get disappointed. We're like, oh, why is this place so dirty? Well, there are so many different realities happening in a place. There are so many different populations, different people living in a place, experiencing very different lived realities too, within a single place. If you go to New York City, there are so many parts. It's not just Times Square. There are so many parts in the city lived by different ethnic groups and different people from different social and economic strata. And there are multiple realities of a place that is not presented to you through tourism marketing often, right? Tourism marketing, tourism brochures, magazines are not going to show you that pile of trash outside of this New York City restaurant. And back to what you were saying, there's a reason, before we criticize, why there's a pile of trash, think about, what's happening in the city. What's the political, what are the policies that give rise to what you see? Sometimes maybe tourism is also part of the problem.
Yeah,
right?
Correct. Sometimes it's precisely the tourists the ones that cause this extra amount of rubbish or trash problem that didn't exist before.
Exactly. So before we point finger and criticize, it's back to what we were talking at the very beginning of the call. It's not just about us. It's not about the tourists. There are people who live in those places that we go to and people go by their everyday life. It's not up to us to criticize because it's not designed for us to visit in the first place. It is designed for
We're
the
only there
residents.
for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, right? So we're not, even the pile of trash is not affecting us. It affects the aesthetics of our photos, perhaps, but we're not the ones
Exactly.
leading that problem.
We also get to remember that it's hugely unfair and insensitive to summarize or like jump to conclusion of a place just after like a 24-hour visit or like a 4-day visit. Yeah. So just like really think about that. And again, back to the idea of decentering ourselves. It's not about you. No, at the end of the day, it's not just about you. Yes, you're visiting the country, a city, a place, but you're the guest there. You're just staying in it for a very short time. Just be respectful for those who are living like what you see day to day. Right.
Yeah, at the very least, try to understand why that is happening. And
yes. Yeah. There's so much I think like the most important thing for us to shift our mindset is to think more deeply and also like to ask why, like to try and understand why are things the way we see instead of just like criticizing, like using our own standards just because something is not familiar, something doesn't happen in the way we're used to. Doesn't mean that that's worse or better. It's just different. One of the most beautiful thing that we can get from travel is to see differences and also find similarities, across cultures, right?
perspective is what I think travel has given me the most. Just a different way of seeing the world that sometimes we take for granted. We think our way is the only way, is the best way, is the superior way. Or on top of that, we come from the global north. We definitely think it's better. And so sometimes, maybe eating with your hands is a fantastic way of eating if you're in India, It's not wrong because we eat with knife and fork.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. But then travel doesn't necessarily open our minds and give us different perspectives until we are willing to reflect and think more deeply and ask questions and think about like what is the most respectful way to engage. Yeah. So
it will not give you that if it's a one-way conversation, for sure. If it's a performative trip where you're just running around taking pictures with beautiful backgrounds and you know absolutely nothing about the place, you're just visiting it to like tick boxes and like you have a list of places that you want to do. Even in Bali, one of the most sold out tours is the tour that takes you to the 5 places to take photos. That is the most sold out tour in an island that's extremely rich in heritage and in culture and in traditions. And yet the most popular tour is the one that takes you rushing around the island from like 5 in the morning to take photos at the 5 most popular places, many of which are actually fake, with the reflection, with the mirror underneath for you to make the reflection of the water. This is the most popular place. And when I think about that, I feel like what has happened? Why can't you just go to Bali to enjoy the place instead of like having this performative travel perspective where you're just going
very
there
much.
and it's all about you, right? It's you with the place as the backdrop. It's a prop.
Yeah, you're using that as a prop. Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, that's pretty much driven by the social media culture, unfortunately, right? Like everything is like, okay, I want to get that exact same picture in that exact same spot, having that exact same like scenery as a background. Yeah, unfortunately, that's a lot about that right now. If we really want to travel more responsibly and more consciously, the first thing is to really pause and think, even like take 10 steps back and say like, okay, why do I even want to go there? Like I want to plan a trip there. Is it because of my social media feed? Is it like, what is it? Like, take a pause and really think about why you want to go to a place. Is there a particular reason how you want to connect with that place? And so conscious travel really starts with like asking these questions even before you start booking your flights and, planning where to go and what to eat.
What would you tell to somebody who tells you, I just want to have a vacation. I want to go somewhere and just relax and enjoy my time. That's it. That's all I want. Like,
okay, that's fine too. But then knowing that everything that you do and not do, like there's always an impact on other people. So like your vacation doesn't entitle you to like, wreak havoc, at the places you go to. And just don't do unto people what you don't want to be done unto you. If you don't want like irresponsible tourists to come to your home and do the things that you loathe, then don't do that to other people.
Yeah, you would definitely not want your children photographed by some random stranger. So why do you do it to others?
So, and again, like being thoughtful doesn't take away any joy or like enjoyment from your vacation. You can still enjoy, being on a beach. You can still enjoy like, relaxing during your vacation. It's totally fine. And it's not mutually exclusive. You can do that thoughtfully so that it's meaningful for other people and that it's meaningful for yourself.
Can we quickly to wrap up, like point at two situations which would have high impact and low impact? Let's say you're going to Cancun and you're staying at an international chain and you're staying in your resort and you're eating all inclusive for the entire time and you never leave the resort versus you're going to staying at a locally owned business, a locally owned hotel or a B&B or a hotel that's just owned by some Mexican people or like ideally people from Cancun. And then you go to the local beach or, you go to the beach that the hotel is nearest to, you do like local people too. And then you take public transportation or you hire a local guide to go and visit some tours. You eat at local restaurants, you have, lunch and dinner at different businesses around and so on. The difference between the two is the tourism leakage and it's the impact that it has.
Yeah. And I would say that at the end of the day, like there would always be people who don't care. And that's, you can't change those people.
Like to be fair, like again, going back to the not shaming thing, right? Yeah. A lot of people in the post in the group of the person from the Caribbean saying like, I've been priced out of my country. I had to leave. A lot of people said, my life is tough enough. I spend my whole year saving for my vacation. I don't want to think about this when I go on vacation. So what is your perspective about that?
I would say that everything comes back to education. Like the more you raise awareness, the more people that tell folks who just want a vacation and not think about anything, the more stories that they hear from real people who are driven out of their home, the
harder it is to separate the two, right? You cannot dissociate so much once you see it in real life and you talk to people. Right?
Once you see it, once you know something, you cannot unlearn it. I mean, the stories of real people having the real lived experience and like a lot of people still go to like all inclusive hotels and, and all of those things just because they don't have the exposure to this kind of stories that they don't know what's happening to the locals because they're so protected, shielded away from the local realities, right? This is where education comes in by exposing them to like real life stories, and their perspective may change and they may want to at least like not cause harm, right? And also highlighting the benefits of community tourism by staying local and interacting with locals. As you said, it's actually a better form of travel. It's actually going to enhance and enrich your experience. And so sometimes you actually get better experience from participating in community tourism. And so if people know the difference, if people know that, that's actually, more interesting way and more meaningful way and more enriching way to travel, then they may consider doing that or trying that, right? But right now they're only focused on the all-inclusive because that's the only form of travel they know.
And it's the easiest, right? It's being promoted, it's cheaper, it's accessible, it's convenient, right?
Right. So, but then I think raising awareness and education is really the key to shifting mindset and helping people make better choices. Because right now, like again, people don't mean to do harm, but they also don't want to think about. There are people who lead a super sustainable life at home, recycling everything, but they're on vacation. Their habits also go on vacation as well, right? But it's really
you're rewarding yourself for all the hard work of the rest of the year by not caring about anything,
not caring about other people and and the environment. Right.
Yes. I mean, the reality is that travel has a lot of benefits, and these benefits don't come from staying at an all-inclusive. The benefits of connection, of learning new things, of feeling empowered about solving your own problems and meeting new people, all of this does not come when you're staying at an all-inclusive resort, right?
Clearly,
the majority of the benefits come when you are being more mindful. So it's for sure that if you try to be more mindful, more thoughtful, more ethical, you will reap those benefits much more than if you don't. So 100%. Hopefully people can see that you're going to be happier. There'll be more joy, more growth if you do that than if you don't. Even if it doesn't look like when you're thinking about, I just want to book a vacation and not think about anything and just do what I want, however I want, without thinking about the consequences, because I think about my consequences every single day of the year. And that can also be exhausted because we are exposed to so much war and conflict and poverty and, things happening, negative things happening around the world. When the vacation comes, people just want to think about the positives. They don't want to think about whether they are harming other people. And I understand that. It happens to me too.
I do understand that too. So I think it's important to highlight for us, our job is to really help people understand the benefits of community tourism and how do we, get people more excited about other forms of tourism that could benefit themselves and the communities.
Yeah, it's an and. People need to understand that it's not an either or. It's and. There is and as well.
I think the key takeaways from this conversation is there's always nuances. It's not about like do this or don't do this, like including volunteering, right? There are some bad forms of volunteering. There are some good forms of volunteering. We just need to dig deeper and try to find out more. And then, yes, you can have a great vacation and also do it in a way that benefits the communities and not do it in a way that is super extractive. It's not like one another. It's not like being a bad tourist or being a good tourist. It's about learning to be, a more thoughtful tourist or traveler. The next time we go on a vacation, these are things that we may want to ask ourselves and do a little bit deeper research and find out ways to support the local communities, knowing that it's going to be like good for ourselves too.
Fantastic. This is a great way to end. But before we finish, I want to ask you to tell us more about this course. So that, because, we've talked about all of these things. To me, I learned a lot from reading your manual, the one that I mentioned at the beginning, which we will link in the notes. But now you have a course, which when I reached out to you the first time to have this conversation, you didn't have. So tell us more about it.
Yeah. So we have a new course called the Rise Traveler Pathway. There are 2 levels and we just launched level 1 in June. It is a foundational course, 10-hour asynchronous and interactive e-learning experience for the everyday traveler. So anyone who's listening to this interview.
So that's us, basically.
Yeah, that's everyone. Because even if you're a tourism professional, you're still like a traveler, right? And so
100%.
Yeah. And so this is a program that's completely asynchronous. And we talked about our positionality, our privilege and power, and, all those things that we mentioned earlier in this interview. We talk about how to prepare for our travels, how to engage ethically with communities, animals, and nature, and also how to ethically tell our stories through our words and our photos, our images. It is quite a thorough program that helps us think about many different aspects of travel and how we position ourselves. This program really covers a lot of the basics. We haven't got the chance to talk about how to take photos ethically.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about language, but all of these things are discussed in the program. And so we'd like to extend an invitation to the Solo Female Travelers community. If you're interested in checking out this program, we have a discount code for you, which Mar will be sharing with all of you in the show notes. And we're just excited to have you in our community. And we host a monthly community call where we'll be chatting about all these topics. Again, not in a way that you're told what to do and what not to do. We will be discussing lenses and frameworks that help you, make better decisions yourselves.
Yeah, I think that telling people what to do would be yet another example of a very colonial mentality.
Exactly.
Here I am, a white person from Spain, telling people what to do.
Telling you not to do.
That would be exactly the representation of what we don't want. But I hope, and I'm sure that from this conversation that is very complex, very deep, and there were so many more subtopics that we didn't talk about, I'm sure people are going to at least take away some thoughts. I did when I did the manual, when I read the manual. So this conversation was a very good reminder that travel doesn't happen in a vacuum, that we are all interconnected. And the places that we visit have stories and history and communities and power dynamics. And all of this was there before we arrived and will be there after we leave.
Will be there after. Yeah.
So, it's important to think about that.
Yeah, 100%.
So thank you very much, Vincie.
Thank you.
I learned a lot from our conversation yet again. And we will put the links to the manual and to the course in the show notes with the discount. Thank you for our community. For all of you listening, I would love to hear your thoughts and your comments. Leave us a comment if you're listening to it on YouTube or on Spotify. You can comment, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. I read every single one of them and I love them. So please do so. And thanks so much, Vincie, once again.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for this opportunity. I really enjoyed this conversation, Mar. Thank you.
And it's time for this week's embarrassing travel story. We'll call this one The Weird Doorknob. This one is from Casey, and here's her story. I had just arrived at my Airbnb after a long travel day. The host had left me instructions for getting into the building and one of those big old-fashioned keys for the apartment itself. I found the door, put the key in, and tried to open it, and nothing. The door also had one of those huge doorknobs right in the middle, which I had never seen before. So I couldn't figure out if I was supposed to turn it, pull it, push the door while turning the key, or what. I tried every possible combination, and nothing worked. After several minutes of this, I was standing there with my suitcase, and I started going through the Airbnb instructions, mildly panicking, wondering if I'm at the wrong place, or someone else maybe rented it, or if I was just maybe scammed. A man came walking down the stairs and noticed me struggling. He didn't speak much English, and I didn't speak much of the local language, but he pointed at the key and then at the door as if to ask if I needed help. I said sure. He put the key in, turned it, pulled the giant knob towards himself while giving the door a little push, and it opened immediately. It took him maybe 3 seconds. I swear I've tried that combination of things, but it didn't open for me. I honestly was only slightly embarrassed and much more happy that I could finally get inside and rest. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Casey. If you have an embarrassing travel story of your own, we'd love to hear it. You can submit yours on our website at www.solofemaletravelers.club.